Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. Chapter 17 of Derick Parfit's book, Reasons and Persons, is titled The Repugnant Conclusion, and that comes after a bit of setup and argumentation, but now we can look directly at what he means by the repugnant conclusion and whether we should entertain it or not. Now, one of the linchpins of it is going to be what he calls the impersonal total principle, which says that if other things are equal, the best outcome for human beings is the one in which there would be the greatest quantity of whatever makes life worth living. So this is a principle for deciding whether there should be, for example, policies aimed at keeping the population at a certain level or a certain rate of growth or a larger rate of growth. And in an earlier part, we saw that he compared a situation A in which people were pretty happy, they had a lot of what made life worth living, and then a situation B where there were twice as many people and not quite a diminution of more than half of what makes life worth living. As a matter of fact, they're right over the line, so they have a little more than half. And because we're looking at the total of people experiencing what makes life worth living, we have to opt for B. And we see this in this chart that reproduces the chart that he has in the text, where A is higher, meaning that the people who are in A are experiencing a higher level of what makes life worth living. B, there's twice as many, so we're looking at the base of it as representing how large the population is. And there's more of them, even though their lives are not as good as those in A. And he says that, well, if we apply this principle, we could also think about a C, where there's even more people, and their lives aren't as good as those in B or those in A, but there's more of them. So we tally it up or we total it up, and, C is going to be better, preferable to B or to A, even though for each individual, it's not as good as living in A or B. Now, that's not that big of a problem, right? He says that, maybe it could be the case that they're having a pretty decent quality of life nonetheless. But what about Z? Z is at the end of the series, and he says that Z is some enormous population. So these, lines here are representing that we have to extend Z's base out very, very far. So it's a very enormous population whose members have lives that are not much above the level where life ceases to be worth living. And he says, different ways in which this could happen. It could have enough ecstasies to make its agonies seem just worth enduring, or it could be uniformly of poor quality. So let's imagine the lives in Z to be of this second, drabber kind. In each of these lives, there is very little happiness. But If the numbers are large enough, he says, this is the outcome with the greatest total sum of happiness, or what makes life worth living. And he says it could be the outcome of either of these. And he gives you an analogy here. The greatest mass of milk might be found in a heap of bottles, each containing only a single drop. So these people's lives are not lives that are not worth living, but they're pretty close. They're really crappy lives. But there's a lot of them. Well, if we follow the impersonal total principle, whether hedonistic form or talking about what's making life worth living, we have to conclude that Z is better than A or B or C. This is going to lead us to the repugnant conclusion, which he is going to summarize in this way. For any possible population of at least 10 billion people, all with a very high quality of life, there must be some much larger imaginable population whose existence, if other things are equal, would be better, even though its members have lives that are barely worth living. And, as far as like this argument goes, we could probably take the 10 billion people out. We're not even at that point right now in our world, but we could easily imagine, a universe in which humanity has gone out to the stars and we have potentially trillions of people. But maybe their lives are terrible. They're barely worth living. The people do want to stay alive, but they're not enjoying some sort of post-scarcity utopia, right? They're scrabbling for existence. And the repugnant conclusion is, hey, if you got enough of them, then that is the better situation. So Parfit says, well, I've chosen this name, repugnant, because I find this conclusion hard to accept. And he says, A and B could in practice be real alternatives. That would not be true of A and Z. And so he says, some claim because of that, we don't have to try to avoid the repugnant conclusion. We can just ignore it. We don't have to test principles in cases that could not occur. And so he says, well, we need to think about impossibility here. What kind of impossibility do we have? So he says, I distinguished between two different kinds of impossibility, deep and technical. So he says, an imagined case is deeply impossible if it requires a major change in the laws of nature, including the laws of human nature. And so, there could be two different reasons for challenging cases that are deeply impossible. We might not be able to imagine what these cases would involve. That would be one big problem. And he says, well, let's bring in an idea. Robert Nozick's utility monster. Now, this is a thought experiment that Robert Nozick comes up with, and he says, imagine that we're thinking about things on utilitarian grounds. There are some people who get enormously greater gains in utility, happiness, well-being, whatever, from sacrifice of others than those others lose. And if we're following what's called act utilitarianism, where we're just looking at situations individually, this seems to require that we should be sacrificed to the monster's maw in order to increase total utility. And Parfit says, okay, the way that Nozick is describing this is a deep impossibility, right? Nozick tells us to imagine that to suppose this imagined person would be so happy or have a life of such high quality that this is the distribution that produces the greatest sum of happiness or the greatest amount of whatever makes life worth living. How could this be true given the billions in our world left in wretchedness that could be so easily relieved by a small fraction of the monster's vast resources? So if that's going to be true, the monster's quality of life must be millions of times as high as that of anyone we know. Can we actually imagine this? He says, not really. Think of the luckiest person you know and ask what a life would have to be like in order to be a million times as much worth living. So he says the gap between our lives and that person's life would be analogous to the gap between our life and those of creatures who are barely conscious. So that's not really going to work that well. But then he says, now consider Z. My imagined population is another utility monster. The difference is that the greater sum of happiness comes from a vast increase, not in the quality of one person's life going up to the moon, so to speak, but the number of lives lived. And this utility monster is neither deeply impossible nor something we cannot imagine. We can imagine what it would be for someone's life to be barely worth living. We can also imagine what it would be like for there to be many people with such lives. So we just put the two of those together and we get situation Z. And he says, okay, technically that would be impossible. In order to suppose it possible, we just need to add some assumptions about the nature and availability of resources. So let's do that right now. Let's imagine a sphere around the sun in which we have, the capacity to host trillions of human beings on its surface, right? Maybe that's technically impossible for us at this point in time, but maybe 10,000 years from now, humanity is going to do that all the time with many stars. And we could imagine these people's lives, the trillions of people living in this Dyson sphere, are just terrible, right? By comparison to us old earthers. That's a technical problem. That's not a deep, you have to change the laws of physics or the laws of human nature in order to make it happen. And so he says, that this is the question that's posed by comparing A and Z. If we're convinced that Z is worse than A, then we have strong grounds for resisting principles that imply that Z is better. Well, this impersonal total principle is one of those that says that Z would be better, so we would have to reject it. Right? And he says, someone might say that's not the case. The principle includes the phrase, if other things are equal, but other things would never be equal, so we can ignore the repugnant conclusion. And he says, no, that's not plausible. Things could be equal. And then he goes into some other moral principles that might be infringed upon by this example. But this is a very interesting thought experiment, isn't it, about the absolute miserable lives with a little bit of what makes life worth living or a little bit of happiness that could be distributed across a vast population. And if we buy this principle, then we have to accept that that would be better than a much smaller amount of people who actually have pretty good lives. And that's the repugnant conclusion that Nozick wants to raise in order to say we definitely don't want to be going there.